G'day CRC family. On behalf of Pastor At and Pastor Naretta, we want to welcome you to today's discussion. Thank you, Pastor At, for the opportunity to introduce today's topic with Dr. Sean Cunningham. We are all familiar with the scripture in Jeremiah 29 verse 11 that says, "For I know the thoughts that I think towards you, says the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you a future and a hope." Isn't it just a great thought that despite that what we are facing, God still has the perfect scenario for us? Today, Sean takes us through identifying different scenarios in our organizations. With many businesses starting to filter back into the work environment, it is important that we use this opportunity to foresee and plan for different scenarios in our organizations and execute these effectively to produce maximum results. He takes us through the identification of different scenarios and what the future would look like and how we should act upon these. Please be assured of our love and support. The church is absolutely essential. Stay connected to your pastors and your structures and be blessed as we listen to this presentation from Dr. Sean Cunningham.
Good afternoon. We are now about 2 months into our lockdown here in South Africa. And in this series of episodes, we have engaged with many different business leaders, asking them how they make decisions, how they plan for the future, and how they have prepared their organizations for the lockdown and for what comes after. Right at this moment, if you turned on the radio or you head to your favorite news website, you will be confronted by so many different visions of the future, different facts, different information for you to consider as a leader. And it could be very difficult for you to figure out how to make your plans to go forward. There's a very powerful method that is called scenario development that allows you to consider these uncertain futures and to look at how your plans are ready for those uncertain futures. Now, usually we use scenario planning when we plan how to change a region or how to upgrade a whole industry or how to change your business, how to prepare your strategies for the future. But we usually have a long-term vision. Usually scenario exercises look 5 or 10 or 15 years into the future. I want to share with you just a very simple approach that you could use to just try and make sense of the next couple of months in your business, because we have a very fluid situation at this moment with so many different uncertainties and factors that are coming into play. So don't be misled. This is a simple methodology, but it could have a profound effect on your business as you develop these scenarios. So let me start off by just telling you about scenarios. So scenarios are vivid pictures, vivid stories of the future and how the future might evolve, how it might work out. You have to really use your imagination, and you can develop scenarios using your core team, maybe some experts in your organization, but you could even include suppliers or some key clients to develop these scenarios. Scenarios are very useful because it allows you to develop early warning systems so that you can see when your organization or the context is shifting in a particular direction. So you can create early warning, we call them flags or indicators that say, hey, we're moving into scenario 3 or we're moving into scenario 1. Scenarios are useful because it helps you to choose different options that position you so that you can be prepared for multiple future pathways. It also helps you to consider the impact of making certain decisions or maybe not making certain decisions. We often don't know what the costs are of not making certain decisions. So when we start thinking about scenarios, scenarios are typically constructed by using uncertainties. And what we typically do is we look at the potential of two uncertainties to affect each other. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to, with your team, with people that you trust, come up with a list of important uncertainties that will affect your organization or that will affect your suppliers or your clients. So you come up with this list of uncertainties. And then you have to work through this list and you have to decide which things are really uncertain and which things are givens. They are almost certain. You need to take those off your list, because when we're dealing with givens and with certainties, we can use trajectories or statistics. But for uncertainties, we have to use our imagination. So before this whole lockdown, there was an uncertainty about how fast countries like South Africa would shift to green economic policies and to alternative energy. And it was an uncertainty because we really got such conflicting signals about how fast this is happening, how important this is. That is really an uncertainty. But whether the economy was going to continue struggling under the current economic policies was almost a given. So that is a difference between uncertainty and a given. Now, you have to, out of your list of uncertainties, choose two that you can start off with. But don't throw away the other list, the ones that you're not taking right now, because you can take all of them in the end and combine them into different constructs and work through all of those scenarios. So I have once or twice moderated workshops where we developed up to 32 different scenarios by combining these uncertainties in creative ways. Okay, so what do you then do with these two scenarios? Well, you take a matrix, you construct a matrix like this on a flip chart or on a big piece of paper or on 4 different sheets of paper, and then you have to go and formulate on the y-axis and on the x-axis 2 versions of these uncertainties. So on the y-axis, I think you can see my cursor. On the y-axis, you would put your uncertainty at the top and you would formulate it and you would say, this uncertainty plays out in the following way. And then on the opposite end of the y-axis, you put in an alternative variation of that uncertainty. And now you do the same for the x-axis with your second uncertainty. So you can develop extreme opposite formulations of your uncertainties, like green policies are adopted much sooner than everybody expect, or an opposite of that is the green policies are not adopted or not accepted. Or in our current situation, the lockdown is lifted much sooner than we expect, or on the opposite end, even though the lockdown is lifted, the economy is just not where it was supposed to be. You can't really do this wrong, and it is possible for you to later come back and refine these axes. So I would urge you to first try this and then try and improve on it, than to try and get it perfect from the first moment. So now what do? Now you've got 4 quadrants, and what you have to do with your team now is imagine in that quadrant, in the extreme of that quadrant, what the situation would be like. But what is really difficult or important is you have to do this in the present tense. So you have to imagine that you are now in the future, a year or 2 or 3 down the line, and that where those 2 axes comes together in that quadrant, you have to think in the extreme. So you have to think in the extreme of the formulation of what is at the top of your y-axis and what is at the corner, at the end of your x-axis. You have to capture these visions, and you have to allow your team members to come up with radical ideas and not say things like, that will never happen. You really have to encourage everybody that's part of this to come up with some ideas and capture them in vivid use images, use drawings, allow people to really come out with what they think it would be like in that scenario. And then you give the scenario a heading, give it a name. There were very famous scenarios developed for South Africa in the 90s, and each scenario had a very vivid name that would take people back to that scenario, so that when we refer to this quadrant, we don't say, remember quadrant 1 or quadrant 2, but remember the scenario of the flight of the flamingos, or remember the scenario of heaven on earth. So you develop each of these scenarios and you give each of them a heading. Now you stay in the future, and with your team, you work backwards from that future towards the present. So you can ask your team things like, what would be in the newspaper headings in this time? What would be the important decisions that we made in the past that led us into this scenario? And what would be the indicators for us to know that we are in this scenario? So this is, again, it's an imaginary session. It's a session where you have to be creative with your team to really think about how would you know that you are in that scenario, and what were the decisions that were made that resulted in you being in that scenario. So then when you've developed this and you've maybe made some adjustments, you can go and look at your current strategy and say, how ready is our organization for these 4 different scenarios? How would we have to change things in our organization if these different scenarios play out? What are things that we have not considered at all? What are some of the measures that we could take to prepare ourselves for a given scenario? Now, people often want to rush through these scenarios, but as a leader, it's maybe in your interest to stay a little bit longer, even in the scenarios that are not so pleasant, in the scenarios that are not opportunistic or positive. You know, those scenarios that are quite negative and heavy. Because the more time you spend there and the more you understand what it would be like in that scenario, the more able you would be able to come back to the present and say, how would we have to anticipate this? What would we have to do in our business plan, in our organization, if we start moving into that scenario? So I want to show you a scenario. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a scenario is really meant to help us understand the distant future. But I think that just for now, because we have so much uncertainty in the environment around us, we could possibly use this just to think about the next couple of weeks and months. So I took on the y-axis an uncertainty that many of my business clients are asking me about. They are saying, Sean, I'm not sure that my clients would be able to buy our products even when the lockdown is lifted. I don't think they will have the money for that, and maybe they are more conservative. So I put that at the bottom of the y-axis, and then I formulated an alternative version of that uncertainty, and that is where clients are able to buy our products. So I've put able and unable to afford our products on the y-axis, and on the x-axis, I looked at our organizational systems that we will be able to perform sufficiently, that we would be able to, even if some people are working from home or, not all our suppliers are back on full steam, that we would be able to still meet the standards and the performance criteria that we have set. And then on the other end of the x-axis, I put down that we cannot perform reliably. Maybe some days we hit our targets, some days we are able to meet our quality criteria, but other days there are just problems with suppliers or problems with logistics or problems with our own processes. And there we have 4 scenarios. And now we can go into that top right quadrant and imagine what will the future be like when clients are unable to afford our products, yet we are able to deliver. So we are able to, with our suppliers, deliver. So what would that future be like? It might be that we receive reports from our operations that we have a lot of stock, but we cannot move it because clients don't buy, or that we ship products and then clients can't pay. Let's imagine what that scenario would be like. And then we go to the next quadrant and so on. And then remember to work back from that future to say, what decisions would we have had to make in the past that led us into that scenario? Because that helps us to identify in the present what things we must be very careful about. So I just want to share some hints with you. The first thing is, you have to stay in the future. You mustn't work from today going into the next 2 months. You have to imagine that you're a few months into the future and then work backwards. And don't work backwards from September straight back to middle May. Work backwards to what were the decisions that we had to make in the weeks before this current moment? What were the decisions that we had to make before that to have led us into this scenario. Remember to also take consideration of what are the consequences of not making certain decisions. In each of these quadrants, I urge you, play around with what could be possible newspaper headings or tweets or headings of reports or names of events or celebrations or photos, or what are those things that people are talking about in whispered conversations over a cup of coffee. So just try to imagine what is on people's minds and hearts in each of those quadrants. Don't think only from your leadership perspective, but think from your people, from your clients, from your staff and your suppliers' perspectives as well. And then you have to ask yourself, how would we know if we are starting to move into a particular scenario? And you have to constantly with your team check, are our plans pushing us into the direction where we want to go, or taking us into the direction where we want to go, or are there things that we are not ready for that we have to address as we go forward? So that is just a very simple method that you can use with your team. After you've developed the first set of scenarios, you can take one of the axes and replace it with another uncertainty and work through it again, or you can take two new uncertainties and combine them. And in so doing, you can develop a whole range of scenarios that you can use to future-proof your business plans and your organization and your team. And I hope that through this exercise, you will realize which people on your team you really have to keep close, which people you really have to protect in your organization, which systems are powerful and robust enough that you can use them in multiple scenarios. Because I think that my advice to you at the moment would be, you have to prepare now for multiple futures, and you are going to have to organize your business and reorganize your business as new information, new regulation, or as the context changes. I want to leave you with that. Please write to us or use the chat function and let us know if you've used this approach. Let us know if you have questions. We will put the email address here at the bottom, or you can email me at sc@misopartner.com. And if I can, I will try to respond to you. God bless you.